They thought they had broken her. A pregnant wife, beaten on her own living room floor, left bleeding while her husband walked away with his mistress smiling beside him. They sold her house. They mocked her in public. They forged evidence to make the world believe she was the liar. And when she was lying in that hospital bed, barely breathing, they toasted with champagne, convinced they had won. But what Ryan Miller and Vanessa Lopez never asked was one simple question. Who is her family? Because somewhere in New York, a phone rang in a billion-dollar boardroom. In San Francisco, a financial titan walked out of a meeting mid-sentence. And in Silicon Valley, a tech mogul abandoned a project worth millions. 3 brothers, 3 empires, 1 baby sister, and 1 promise. Whoever did this will lose everything. What happened next wasn't revenge. It was a masterclass in consequence. A slow, silent, suffocating demolition of 2 people who dared to believe they could hurt a Bennett and walk away free. By the time they realized the storm was coming, it was already too late. Stay with me until the end, because the moment these 3 brothers walk into that hospital room is the moment justice stops being a word and becomes a force of nature. Lesson/value statement. This story reminds us of one powerful truth. Silence never protects us but our voice, and the people who truly love us always will. No matter how broken you feel today, remember, the ones who underestimate your strength are the ones who will regret it the most.
The California sun streamed into the nursery, casting a warm, golden glow on the pale blue walls. Sophia Bennett cradled her infant son, humming a soft lullaby, as he slept soundly against her chest. Months had passed since that terrible night, and the peace she felt now was a world away from the chaos that had nearly destroyed her. The faint scar on her shoulder was the only physical reminder of the nightmare. Down the hall, she could hear her eldest brother, Ethan, on the phone, his voice a low, protective rumble. Her life was finally her own again, quiet and filled with the gentle sounds of new motherhood. The names Ryan Miller and Vanessa Lopez were nothing more than ghosts of a painful past, their lives systematically dismantled and swept away by a storm of retribution they never saw coming. Justice had been served not with loud vengeance, but with the silent, crushing weight of consequence. The suburban house was sold, the memories scrubbed clean, and in this new, secure apartment overlooking the ocean, Sophia knew, with absolute certainty, that she and her baby were loved and safe. She whispered to her sleeping son, the same promise she once made in fear, but now delivered with unbreakable strength. You are so loved, I promise. That peace, however, was hard won, purchased with a currency of power and precision. The unraveling of Ryan Miller and Vanessa Lopez began the moment Sophia's brothers landed in Los Angeles. It was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, calculated demolition. Matthew, the financial wizard, meticulously dissected Ryan's struggling auto shop, exposing every financial misstep and leveraging debts until the business choked on itself and collapsed into bankruptcy. There were no dramatic confrontations, just a series of quiet, devastating phone calls and legal notices that left Ryan ruined, his dream turning to dust in his hands. For Vanessa, the venomous whispers she had used against Sophia were turned back on her tenfold. Lucas, the tech mogul, orchestrated a campaign that methodically exposed her treachery, her ambition, and her character to every important person in her social and professional circles. Her glamorous life crumbled away, leaving her isolated and despised, a pariah in the world she had tried so desperately to conquer. They paid not with a single act of violence, but with the complete and total erasure of their futures. But before the systematic takedown, there was the raw, immediate fury. It had arrived on 3 separate private jets, converging on Los Angeles as the sun began to rise. Ethan, Matthew, and Lucas Bennett walked into the sterile quiet of Los Angeles General Hospital, their tailored suits looking entirely out of place amidst the scrubs and antiseptic smell. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The air around them crackled with an icy rage that made nurses and doctors step aside instinctively. When a doctor tried to give them a clinical update on Sophia's condition, mentioning fractures, internal bruising, and the precarious state of the baby, Ethan held up a single, silencing hand. "Is she alive?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. When the doctor nodded, he continued, "And the baby?" "For now, both are stable," the doctor replied cautiously. That was all they needed to hear. In that moment, the 3 brothers made a silent vow. They would handle Sophia's recovery with tenderness and infinite patience. But for the man who had done this, and the woman who had helped him, there would be no mercy. The storm had officially made landfall. The storm was born from 3 separate phone calls that shattered the late-night silence on opposite sides of the country. In a towering New York City skyscraper, Ethan Bennett was closing a billion-dollar real estate deal when his private line rang. He silenced a room of executives with a single glance before answering. In a glass-walled office in San Francisco, Matthew Bennett was analyzing global market trends, his focus absolute, until his phone buzzed with an urgent alert from his assistant. And in a sprawling Silicon Valley campus, Lucas Bennett was deep in a coding session, fueled by caffeine and innovation, when the call came through, pulling him from his digital world. The message was the same for each of them, delivered in the clipped, professional tone of a hospital administrator. "Your sister, Sophia Bennett, has been admitted. She was the victim of a severe assault." In those few seconds, empires were forgotten. Deals were left hanging, markets were ignored, and code was abandoned. 3 of the most powerful men in America dropped everything, their universes shrinking to focus on a single, horrifying point. Their baby sister was hurt. Their only question was, which flight is the fastest? While her brothers were mobilizing a force of nature, Sophia was fighting a quiet, desperate battle under the harsh fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit. Her world had been reduced to the steady beeping of heart monitors and the hushed voices of her colleagues, who now tended to her with a grim, sorrowful dedication. She drifted in and out of a haze of pain, her thoughts circling back to the tiny, fragile life inside her. She was 28 years old, a healer who now needed healing, a caregiver who was now utterly dependent on the care of others. The irony was a bitter pill she was too weak to swallow. The neighbor who had dialed 911 had done more than just report a disturbance. They had ignited a beacon. That single, brave act of intervention was the first domino to fall, setting in motion a chain of events that would pull Sophia from the darkness and shine an unforgiving light on the 2 people who had pushed her there. What Ryan and Vanessa failed to understand was that Sophia was never truly alone, even when she felt most isolated. She was a Bennett, and that name carried a weight they were about to feel. Her journey to that hospital bed had been a terrifying blur of motion and sound. Inside the ambulance, the wail of the siren was a distant scream, less real than the frantic rhythm of her own heart. A paramedic's calm, steady voice cut through her delirium, asking questions she couldn't answer. An oxygen mask was pressed over her face, the cool plastic a strange comfort against her bruised skin. Through half-closed eyes, she saw another paramedic moving a scanner over her belly, their brow furrowed in concentration. The words, "We have a faint heartbeat," were the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. It was a thread of hope she clung to with every ounce of her remaining strength. She had once promised this child protection, and now, broken and battered, she was still trying to keep that promise. The woman who routinely stayed late to comfort lonely patients, the nurse whose compassion was a legendary comfort on the hospital's fourth floor, was now the patient everyone was praying for. And the man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed for, was nowhere in sight. Back at the little house on the quiet suburban street, the flashing red and blue lights painted the walls in grotesque, dancing colors. As the paramedics carefully lifted Sophia onto a gurney, her neighbors watched from their windows, their faces etched with horror. The illusion of peaceful suburbia had been shattered. Ryan Miller stood in the doorway, a statue of cold fury, his knuckles white as he watched the ambulance pull away. He didn't move to follow. He didn't ask if she would be okay. Just as the ambulance doors closed, Vanessa Lopez materialized from the darkness of the yard, her silhouette sleek and predatory. She laid a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, her voice a poisonous whisper. "You did what you had to," she purred, reinforcing the lies that had fueled his rage. "She betrayed you. Now we can finally be together." As she led him back inside, away from prying eyes, neither of them realized they were sealing their own fate. The neighbor, hidden behind their curtains, was already on the phone with the police, their trembling voice giving a detailed account of the screams they had heard just minutes earlier. That phone call was made necessary by the sheer brutality that preceded it. The final, terrible moments of the assault were a storm of blind rage. Each time the wooden stick came down, it felt like Sophia's world was breaking apart, piece by piece. She had curled into a ball on the floor, her arms a desperate, flimsy shield over her stomach. Her own survival was secondary. Her entire being was focused on the fragile life she was carrying. Through a fog of agony, she begged him, not for herself, but for their child. But her pleas were just noise to a man consumed by a phantom betrayal, her whispers to her baby. "Stay with me, little one. Stay strong." Miom became a mantra, a prayer against the darkness. Then, a final, crushing blow landed, and the world dissolved into blackness. Her strength gave out, and she collapsed, a broken heap on the living room floor. Ryan stood over her, breathing heavily, the weapon still in his hand. His final words, dripping with a venom that Vanessa had so carefully distilled, hung in the air. "You'll regret lying to me." A trickle of blood seeped from the corner of Sophia's mouth as her breathing became terrifyingly shallow. The violence had erupted from a single poisoned question. Ryan's accusation, "Whose child is it, Sophia?" had struck her with the force of a physical blow. She froze, the simple dinner she had prepared growing cold on the table, her heart plummeting. The joyful news she had been so eager to share, the image of the tiny, fluttering heartbeat she had seen on the ultrasound screen that very afternoon, vanished from her mind. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It's yours, Ryan. This is our baby." But her words were useless against the wall of suspicion Vanessa had built around his heart. He saw not his loving wife, but a deceitful stranger. He took a step toward her, his eyes blazing with an intoxicating mix of alcohol and rage. She backed away instinctively, her hand flying to her stomach. "Please, Ryan, don't," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I'm carrying your child." He barely heard her. He only heard Vanessa's insidious lies, echoing in his head, telling him he was a fool. It was then that his eyes landed on the wooden stick he used for fence repairs, leaning against the wall. He stormed through the front door that night, not as a husband, but as an executioner. The familiar slam of the door was sharp, violent, and it sent a jolt of fear through Sophia. She had been waiting for him, her heart filled with a nervous, fluttering excitement. She had rehearsed the words in her head all day. "We're having a baby. I saw the heartbeat." She imagined his surprise, his joy, the return of the man she had fallen in love with. Instead, the man who staggered into the living room was a stranger. The thick, sour smell of whiskey clung to him like a shroud, and his eyes, usually warm and full of laughter, were dark and empty pools of rage. He didn't see the dinner she had made or the hopeful sparkle in her eyes. He saw only the lies Vanessa had fed him, whispers of infidelity and doubt that had festered in his mind for weeks. Sophia's smile faltered, the joyful announcement dying on her lips as she looked at the monster her husband had become. The peaceful evening she had planned was about to become the backdrop for a tragedy. The seeds of that night's horror were planted in a dimly lit bar across town hours earlier. Vanessa Lopez, with her glamorous clothes and calculating eyes, leaned in close to Ryan, her voice a seductive mix of sympathy and poison. She masterfully twisted his insecurities into certainties, painting Sophia not as a dedicated, overworked nurse, but as a secretive, unfaithful wife. "She's been distant, hasn't she, Ryan?" she'd murmured, tracing a finger along the rim of his glass. "Working all those late nights. Are you sure she's really at the hospital?" She made him question every late shift, every tired sigh, every moment of Sophia's exhaustion. The pregnancy was the final, perfect weapon in her arsenal. "A baby now? Isn't the timing convenient?" she'd insinuated, letting the venom sink in. Ryan, his pride already wounded by his failing business, drank it all down, letting her poison fill the empty spaces where his confidence used to be. By the time he left the bar, he was no longer a man questioning his wife. He was a man convinced of her ultimate betrayal. The satisfying click of handcuffs echoed through the grand ballroom, a sound far louder than the gasps of the city's elite. Sophia watched, tears finally tracing paths of release down her cheeks as uniformed officers led Ryan away. His protests, "You can't do this to me, I'm her husband," were nothing more than the pathetic whimpers of a defeated man. Vanessa's shrieks were even more desperate, her elegant facade stripped away to reveal the venomous creature beneath as she was escorted out, her designer gown now looking like a cheap costume. This wasn't a scene of pain. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated liberation. The crushing weight that had settled on her heart for months finally lifted, vanishing into the glittering air of the chandelier-lit room. She was no longer that broken woman on a cold hospital floor. Tonight, she was the architect of her own justice. Reporters, sensing the climax of an epic story, swarmed forward, a chaotic sea of flashing cameras and outstretched microphones. "Sophia, do you have a message for other women watching tonight?" one journalist yelled over the din. Her brother, Ethan, passed her a microphone. Her hand was perfectly steady as she took it. Her voice, amplified through the hall, was clear and resonant, cutting through the noise. "Yes," she began, her gaze sweeping across the stunned crowd. "Never stay silent. Never let anyone convince you that you are weak." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I mistakenly believed that I had to endure the pain, that I had to hide the truth to protect my child. But I was wrong. The only way to truly protect the ones we love is by speaking out." Her voice swelled with conviction. "To every single woman who is suffering in silence right now, please hear me. Your voice matters more than you can ever know. You are not alone." Sophia had always been the protected one, the cherished baby sister to 3 fiercely loyal older brothers. Even though they were separated by an entire country, their bond was unbreakable. Ethan, the eldest, was a force of nature in New York real estate, a man whose name could make or break fortunes. Matthew, the second, was a brilliant and methodical financial strategist in San Francisco, a quiet genius who saw the world in numbers. And Lucas, the youngest of the brothers, was a visionary tech icon in Silicon Valley, bold and relentlessly driven. They were all workaholics, consumed by their empires. But Sophia was their common ground, their soft spot. In their eyes, she was still the little girl they had taught to ride a bike and scared away monsters from under the bed for. They had no idea a real monster had entered her life because their independent, capable sister had never once uttered a single word of complaint. And so that's how it was. It all began not with cruelty, but with love, a blinding, selfless love. 5 years earlier, Sophia Bennett was just a 28-year-old nurse, smitten with a handsome mechanic named Ryan Miller, who had calloused hands and a dream of opening his own auto shop. She saw potential where others saw struggle. She believed in him with every fiber of her being, while her friends cautioned her, telling her she was giving too much of herself away. Sophia would just smile and say, "That's what love is." She worked double shifts, picking up grueling holiday hours at the hospital, pouring every spare dollar she earned into his dream. She thought she was building a future with the love of her life. She never imagined she was financing her own destruction, laying the foundation for a man whose gratitude would curdle into resentment, and whose love would eventually turn into a rage that would nearly cost Sophia and her unborn child their lives. The final lock on the restaurant door clicked shut with a deafening finality, the sound echoing Ryan's own hollowed-out soul. A bright orange foreclosure notice was slapped onto the glass, a public declaration of his failure for the whole world to see. Across the street, Vanessa Lopez stood alone, shivering not from the cold but from the chilling realization that her plan had spectacularly imploded. Her designer bag felt heavy with uselessness, her confident smirk replaced by a mask of sheer panic. The whispers from passers-by were no longer about her alluring style, but about the homewrecker who had hitched her wagon to a falling star. Justice wasn't a loud, dramatic courtroom scene. It was this quiet, suffocating unraveling of their entire world, a slow-motion collapse they were powerless to stop. Every asset was frozen, every line of credit severed, and every so-called friend had vanished like smoke. This devastation wasn't an accident or a stroke of bad luck. It was a meticulously engineered demolition. It had begun with quiet phone calls from men with powerful voices, calls that dismantled Ryan's supply chains and revoked his business licenses. It continued with a silent, digital assault that exposed Vanessa's history of manipulation, flooding social media with irrefutable proof of her predatory nature, turning public opinion against her in a single afternoon. Her trendy downtown bar had fired her, citing a morality clause she'd never bothered to read. Ryan's world had been dismantled brick by brick, while Vanessa's was burned to the ground with a single match. They had built their new life on the foundations of Sophia's pain, never imagining that her family was capable of summoning an earthquake to swallow them whole. They had awakened a storm, and now they were drowning in the flood. It had all started just weeks earlier, with the arrival of three men who moved with the unnerving calm of apex predators. The first, Ethan, with eyes as sharp and unforgiving as shattered glass, had appeared at Ryan's restaurant during the lunch rush. He didn't order food, he simply sat, his presence casting a pall over the entire room until Ryan's hands trembled so badly he dropped a plate. The second, Matthew, had intercepted Vanessa outside her apartment building, his smile disarmingly pleasant as he handed her a thick, legal portfolio that detailed every lie she had ever told. The third, Lucas, never showed his face at all, yet his hand was everywhere, in the sudden glitches of their online bank accounts and the strange, targeted ads that seemed to follow them, whispering of their cruelty. They were the Bennett brothers, and their retribution was not swift and loud, but slow, silent, and suffocating. They had mobilized within hours of a single, desperate phone call. From his penthouse office, overlooking the New York City skyline, Ethan, a titan of real estate, had cut off his board of directors mid-sentence. "Cancel every meeting for the foreseeable future," he'd commanded, his voice a low growl. "My sister is in trouble." He was on his private jet before the sun had set, the city lights below blurring into a fiery streak of his own focused rage. Miles away in a San Francisco boardroom, Matthew, a master strategist in the world of venture capital, abruptly stood up, shocking his partners into silence. "A family matter has come up," he stated, his usual calm demeanor replaced by an icy resolve. "I am leaving immediately and will not be back until it is resolved." And deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, Lucas, the brilliant but reclusive coding genius, pushed away from his monitors, abandoning a project that was worth millions. His brothers had called. That was all he needed to know. That frantic, cross-country mobilization was triggered by a phone call that lasted less than 120 seconds, but it was long enough to shatter Ethan Bennett's composure. He had called for a routine check-in, but the voice that answered was not his vibrant baby sister's. It was the fragmented, terrified whisper of a stranger. She attempted to deflect, her words shaky and unconvincing. "I'm okay, Ethan, really. Please don't worry about me." But the thinly veiled sobs that punctuated her sentences told him everything he needed to know. It was the sound of a spirit on the verge of breaking, a sound that ignited a protective fury, so intense it was almost primal. He didn't press her for details. He didn't need them. He just needed to hear her pain, and in that instant, he knew he would tear down the world to make it right. Before that call, Sophia had been drowning in the sterile silence of her hospital room, convinced she had to face her nightmare by herself. Her pride was a fortress, preventing her from reaching out to the very people who would have moved mountains for her. She had convinced herself that admitting the depths of Ryan's betrayal would be admitting her own failure, a stain on the powerful Bennett name. A compassionate nurse named Angela had tried to break through her defenses. "Sophia, honey," she had said, her voice full of warmth, "you don't have to carry this weight alone. You have family. Let them help you." But Sophia had just shaken her head, fresh tears tracing paths down her bruised cheeks. "They're powerful, successful men," she'd whispered. "They have their own lives. I can't be a source of trouble for them." Angela's reply was firm but gentle. "Trouble? No. You're their sister. Love isn't a burden." Yet, Sophia had turned away, the weight of her shame too heavy to share. That feeling of isolation had reached its agonizing peak just one evening prior. Her humiliation had been made a public spectacle in the one place she should have felt safe. Vanessa, draped in a scandalously tight crimson dress, had marched into the hospital lobby, clinging to Ryan's arm like a trophy. Their entrance was a calculated performance, their smirks aimed like weapons. Nurses, doctors, and other patients stopped and stared, their shocked silence a testament to the audacity of the display. Leaning in close to Ryan, Vanessa's voice was deliberately loud, dripping with venom. "See, baby? You don't ever have to worry about deceitful people again. You've got me now." The words were a direct shot, meant to wound and incapacitate, and they hit their mark perfectly. Sophia, who had been sitting in a wheelchair near the main nursing station, felt the world tilt on its axis. Every eye in the lobby shifted to her, their gazes a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The air grew thick and heavy, making it impossible to breathe. Ryan's betrayal in the privacy of their home was a deep wound, but to have him parade his affair in front of her colleagues in the very halls where she had worked tirelessly to heal others was an act of profound cruelty that shattered what was left of her heart. Hot tears stung her eyes, but a flicker of defiance kept them from falling. With as much dignity as she could muster, she slowly turned her wheelchair around and headed back to her room, each push of the wheels feeling like a monumental effort. Vanessa's sharp, triumphant laughter echoed down the hallway behind her, a sound that would haunt her dreams. Ryan didn't even bother to look in her direction. Just before that public execution of her spirit, Ryan and Vanessa had been testing the waters of their new relationship out in the open, careless of who they hurt. They were spotted at a popular diner in the heart of Los Angeles, acting like a carefree new couple. Vanessa's hand was possessively placed over Ryan's, her laughter booming across the restaurant, demanding attention. The local community wasn't blind. They knew Ryan was a married man. They knew Sophia, the kind, dedicated nurse. Yet there Ryan was, behaving as though his wife, lying injured in a hospital bed, was nothing more than a distant memory. This brazen display fueled the gossip mill. The whispers started to shift, poisoned by Vanessa's carefully planted lies. Maybe Sophia wasn't so innocent after all. Some people began to speculate. A man doesn't act like that without a good reason. Those vicious rumors found their way back to Sophia, delivered by well-meaning but clumsy acquaintances, and each word was like another blow to her already battered body. She yearned to stand on a rooftop and scream the truth, that her devotion to Ryan had been absolute, that she had given him every part of herself, but her voice felt trapped, choked by an overwhelming sense of shame. While she was confined to her hospital bed, wrestling with these invisible wounds, her physical ones were slowly healing. She consciously avoided looking at her own reflection, unable to confront the dark bruises on her face that served as a physical map of Ryan's fury. Her coworkers would visit, bringing bouquets of flowers and heartfelt cards, their attempts at comfort only highlighting her profound sense of isolation. She would offer a weak, practiced smile, assuring them she was recovering well. But inside, a terrifying question looped endlessly. What would he do when he came back? All of this began in the immediate, hazy aftermath of the attack. As the ambulance sirens faded into the distance, carrying a broken Sophia toward Los Angeles General Hospital, Ryan remained in their living room. His hands shook uncontrollably, his mind a fog of confusion and a strange, hollow regret. Vanessa emerged from the bedroom and stood behind him, her reflection in the dark window revealing a cold, predatory smile. "Don't you worry about a thing, baby," she cooed, her voice a silky poison. "As soon as she's gone for good, everything that was hers will belong to us. We'll finally have the life we deserve." Ryan could only manage a some nod, though a deep, unsettling feeling flickered in the pit of his stomach. He had shattered a sacred trust, a line from which there was no return. Neither of them grasped that their cruelty had not ended a story, but had instead ignited a war, and the opposing army was already on its way. Vanessa's manipulation had been a masterclass in psychological warfare. She had expertly preyed on Ryan's deepest insecurities, turning his professional failures into weapons he would aim at his own wife. She methodically planted the most corrosive of lies, whispering doubts into his ear with practiced ease. "Are you even sure that baby is yours, Ryan?" she would muse, offering no evidence but letting the poison seep in. "A woman who works such strange hours, You never know who she's really seeing. It was a baseless, vile accusation, but for a man desperate to deflect blame for his own shortcomings, it was a lifeline. He clung to the lie because it gave him permission to hate Sophia, to justify the betrayal he was already committing. Behind the closed doors of their borrowed apartment, Vanessa fanned the flames of his resentment, constantly reminding him of his stagnating career and twisting the narrative until he genuinely believed Sophia was the architect of his misery. The poison took hold, and Ryan's simmering resentment metastasized into a violent rage. His love for Sophia curdled into deep suspicion, which then festered into a consuming anger. Vanessa, however, felt nothing for him. Her actions were not born from passion, but from cold, calculated ambition. She saw Ryan not as a partner, but as a pawn, a man with some assets and a weak will whom she could easily control. Through him, she envisioned a future of financial security and elevated social status, a life she felt she was owed. But her entire scheme was built on a critical miscalculation. She saw Sophia as a simple, plain woman and completely overlooked the powerful, protective family that stood behind her. She never bothered to learn their names. This tragic chain of events was set in motion by something as mundane as a failing business. The clientele at Ryan's small restaurant had dwindled, choosing instead the brightly lit, more modern eateries that were popping up all over the city. His dream was souring, and with it, his self-respect curdled into a foul resentment. Rather than innovate or work with more determination, Ryan allowed a deep-seated bitterness to take root in his heart. He began to resent Sophia's success, viewing her stable income from the hospital not as a support, but as a constant, silent judgment of his own failings. Her strength felt like a personal attack, her professional respect a mirror to his own decline. His own feelings of inadequacy became a suffocating presence, a darkness he carried everywhere. It was in this state of mind that he first crossed paths with Vanessa Lopez, a woman who seemed to be the very antithesis of his wife. In Ryan's warped perception, Vanessa was a force of nature, fearless, brazen, and alluring in a way that felt like a thrill. She was the manager of a pulsating downtown night spot, a place defined by its booming bass and endless nights. One evening, seeking to numb the ache of his wounded pride, Ryan found himself at her bar, attempting to dissolve his problems in a glass of bottom-shelf bourbon. From across the crowded room, Vanessa's sharp eyes landed on him immediately, recognizing the unmistakable signs of a man crumbling from the inside, starved for any form of affirmation. She approached him, played her part to perfection, and fed him the validation he so desperately craved, whispering that a man like him was meant for so much more. And Ryan, blinded by his own ego and resentment, believed every single word. So that's how it was. The sunlight felt warm on Sophia's face as she stood on the courthouse steps, a gentle breeze stirring her hair. In her arms, her baby slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. Flanked by her brothers, Ethan and Matthew, she watched as Ryan Miller, the man who was once her husband, was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and ruin. Beside him, Vanessa Lopez, her carefully constructed facade shattered, avoided the cameras with a venomous glare. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been delivered with the crushing weight of truth, leaving no room for doubt or appeal. A deep, profound sense of peace settled over Sophia, a feeling she hadn't known in years. The battle was finally over. The poison had been drawn out, and for the first time, the future felt like a clean, open page waiting to be written. Lucas, ever the protector, draped a jacket over her shoulders, his touch gentle. "It's done, Sophie," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He can never hurt you again." She leaned into him, her heart overflowing with a gratitude so immense it brought fresh tears to her eyes. Tears of relief, not of pain. This victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to the three men who had moved heaven and earth to give her back her life. But this moment of peace was earned through a brutal war waged in a courtroom just an hour earlier. That victory was anything but certain when the proceedings began. The air in the courtroom had been thick with tension, a silent battle of wills between two sides. Ryan's lawyer painted a picture of a scorned husband, a man deceived. But then Matthew Bennett, calm and methodical, took the floor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply began to dismantle their lies, piece by meticulous piece. First came the medical reports, clinical and undeniable, detailing Sophia's injuries with chilling precision. Then, enlarged photos of her bruised face and arms filled the screen, silencing the room. A collective gasp rippled through the spectators as the images lingered, a stark testament to Ryan's cruelty. Matthew's voice remained steady as he presented financial records, a tangled web of deceit he had unraveled. He showed wire transfers from Ryan to Vanessa, dates and times that directly corresponded with their fabricated stories. It was the clear, cold arithmetic of manipulation. The final blow came from an unexpected source, a bartender from Vanessa's establishment. Lucas had found him, a young man terrified of getting involved. But Lucas's unique brand of persuasion, a mix of quiet threat and earnest appeal, had convinced him to speak. On the stand, the bartender recounted overhearing Vanessa coaching Ryan, feeding him lies about Sophia, laughing about how easily he believed her. She told him to say the baby wasn't his, the bartender stated, his voice shaking. She said it was the perfect way to destroy a woman. At that, Ryan lunged to his feet, shouting denials, his composure finally cracking. Vanessa's mask of sympathy crumbled, revealing the ugly ambition beneath. In that moment, everyone saw them for what they were. The judge's gavel fell like a death knell on their charade. Their empire of lies, so carefully built, had been demolished in a matter of hours by three brothers united by a singular, unshakable purpose: protecting their own. That flawless courtroom execution was born from weeks of relentless, covert preparation. While Sophia healed, her brothers had gone to war in the shadows. This victory wasn't achieved with loud threats, but with quiet, calculated precision. In a rented downtown office that smelled of stale coffee and determination, Matthew had worked day and night, transforming into a strategist mapping out a battlefield. He built timelines, cross-referenced bank statements with phone records, and pieced together a narrative of abuse and manipulation so airtight it was suffocating. He found the digital breadcrumbs Vanessa and Ryan had carelessly left behind, weaving them into an unbreakable chain of evidence. His work was the silent, intellectual engine driving their quest for justice, turning raw emotion into a weapon of pure logic. He left nothing to chance, anticipating every possible counter-argument and preparing a rebuttal before it was even uttered. This was his domain, a war of information, and he was its grandmaster. While Matthew commanded the intelligence front, Lucas took to the streets. He was the operative on the ground, his easy charm a disarming tool that opened doors and loosened tongues. He spent hours in dimly lit bars and coffee shops, listening to whispers, gathering stories from former employees of Vanessa who had seen her manipulative nature firsthand. He was the one who tracked down the bartender, sitting with him for hours until the young man's fear was finally overcome by his conscience. Lucas's quick temper, once a liability, was now a focused instrument. He channeled his rage not into mindless violence, but into an unyielding drive to uncover every single dirty secret Ryan and Vanessa thought they had buried. He was the relentless pressure, the force that made their hidden world crumble from the inside out. His anger was the fuel, but Matthew's plan was the map that guided it. And then there was Ethan, the eldest, the titan of industry who wielded power on a scale Ryan couldn't even comprehend. While his brothers gathered evidence, Ethan waged a different kind of war. With a few quiet phone calls from his penthouse office overlooking the city, he systematically dismantled Ryan's financial world. He contacted business partners, presenting them with quiet, irrefutable proof of Ryan's instability and character flaws. Contracts were canceled, credit lines were frozen, and deals that were weeks from closing evaporated overnight. Ethan ensured that by the time Ryan walked into that courtroom, he was already a ruined man, stripped of the wealth and status that gave him his arrogant confidence. He showed Ryan that his threats of leaving Sophia with nothing were hollow. Because true power wasn't in bullying the weak. It was in the silent, unshakable foundation of a family that would burn the world down to protect its own. They had a plan, and it was devastatingly effective. This intricate plan, this three-pronged attack, was forged in the sterile quiet of a hospital family lounge on the night they were reunited with their sister. The fury was still fresh, a raw, open wound in the room. Lucas paced like a caged tiger, slamming his fist against his palm, the sound echoing the violence he wished to unleash. "I'll kill him," he had seethed, his voice a low growl. "I swear I will." It was Ethan who had stopped him, his own jaw clenched so tightly it seemed carved from granite. "We don't act out of rage," he commanded, his voice sharp but controlled. "We act with precision." It was in that moment that their mission crystallized. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about total annihilation of the threat. Matthew, ever the pragmatist, had leaned forward, his pen poised over a notebook. "Ryan isn't the only problem. Vanessa is dangerous too. She's manipulative, and she's feeding him lies. If we go after him without exposing her, they'll spin the story against Sophia. We need proof." Their individual anger merged into a single, cold purpose. Sophia's whispered fears from her hospital bed had only hardened their resolve. "What if it's too late?" she had asked, her voice barely audible. "He said he wants a divorce. He said I'll be left with nothing." The memory of her words fueled them. Ethan's eyes had darkened at the recollection. "He won't take anything," he promised, his voice an ironclad vow. "Not your home, not your dignity, not your child. He thinks you're alone, Sophie. He thinks you're weak. He has no idea who your family is." They surrounded the small table in that lounge, three forces of nature aligning: Lucas's fire, Matthew's intellect, and Ethan's power. They laid out the first steps: gather evidence, find witnesses, and then orchestrate public exposure. They would destroy Ryan's image because that was the source of his power. It was a promise made in the dead of night, a silent oath that sealed the fates of two people who had dared to harm a Bennett. Ethan's final words that night echoed in their strategy. "Rest now, Sophie. Let us carry this fight. You've suffered enough." And they had. Their resolve had been tested just hours before that planning session, when Ryan Miller himself had stormed into the sanctity of the hospital room. He hadn't come alone. The man Sophia had been married to for 5 years stood there with his arm wrapped possessively around Vanessa Lopez, a smug smirk plastered on his face. It was the smirk of a man who believed he held all the cards, a man convinced he had already won. The brothers were still processing the shock of Sophia's condition when a timid nurse announced his arrival. "Her husband," she had whispered, and the word felt like an obscenity. Sophia's heart had seized in her chest, a wave of pure terror washing over her. "I don't want to see him," she had pleaded, her voice trembling. But it was too late. The door was thrust open, and the atmosphere in the room instantly curdled, turning heavy and suffocating. The fragile peace of their reunion was shattered by his arrogant presence. Ryan barged in with Vanessa, slinking behind him, her lips painted a garish red. Ethan immediately moved to intercept him, his formidable frame a human wall between the monster and his sister. "You have no right to be here," Ethan growled, his voice a low rumble of thunder. Ryan, however, was undeterred, drunk on his own perceived power. "She's still my wife, isn't she? I have every right." His gaze, cold and devoid of any warmth, flicked over to Sophia, who shrank back against her pillows. "Don't act like you're the victim here, Sophia," he sneered, his words sharp and cruel. "Everyone knows the truth. That baby isn't mine." A strangled gasp escaped Sophia's lips. The accusation was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The pain was so intense, so visceral, it felt as if her heart was being ripped from her chest. How could he say that? How could the man she once loved voice such a monstrous lie? Before Sophia could even form a response, Vanessa leaned into Ryan, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet false sympathy. "Poor Ryan. Imagine being tricked by the woman you trusted most." She looked directly at Sophia, her eyes glittering with triumph. "But don't worry, baby. You won't have to deal with her much longer." That was the final spark. Lucas's control snapped. He lunged, a roar of pure rage tearing from his throat, his fists ready. But Matthew was faster, grabbing his brother's arm with surprising strength. Not here," Matthew hissed, his voice tight with restraint. Not yet." Misinterpreting their control for weakness, Ryan's smirk widened. He produced a folded document from his jacket and casually tossed it onto Sophia's bed. "I'm filing for divorce. Sign it. You'll get nothing. No house, no money, no car. I'll even fight for custody just to make sure you're left with absolutely nothing." His words were a declaration of war, delivered with the casual cruelty of a true tyrant. Sophia stared at the divorce papers, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. Her hand instinctively flew to her stomach, a desperate, protective gesture to shield her unborn child from his venom. "You wouldn't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You wouldn't take my baby." Ryan's smile turned predatory. "Watch me." A suffocating silence descended on the room. Then Ethan took a deliberate step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerously low pitch. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Ryan's face, though he tried to cover it with a hollow laugh. "What? You think you can scare me? I'm not afraid of you or your money." Ethan leaned in closer, his eyes like burning coals. "She belongs to no one, and if you even think about touching her child, you will face consequences so severe you can't even begin to imagine them." Vanessa, sensing the shift in power, tugged at Ryan's arm. "Come on, Ryan, let's go." As they left, Ryan threw one last, hateful look at Sophia. He had no idea he had just signed his own death warrant. That brutal confrontation had been preceded by the brothers' shocking arrival. They had come from 3 different corners of the country, converging on Los Angeles International Airport at sunrise like a gathering storm. Though they stepped off separate flights, their paths merged in the terminal, and they fell into a perfectly synchronized stride. Their presence alone was enough to turn heads. 3 impeccably dressed, powerful men, moving with a shared, urgent purpose, their faces set like stone. They were not just chief executive officers that day, they were older brothers on a mission of vengeance. When they burst through the door of Sophia's hospital room, she was staring blankly out the window, lost in a fog of despair. She had told herself they were too busy, too far away to come. But here they were. Ethan came in first, his large frame seeming to shrink the room, His expression softened instantly upon seeing her, but his hands balled into fists at the sight of the dark bruises on her skin. "Who did this to you?" he demanded, his voice tight, even though he already knew the answer. Matthew followed close behind, his usual calm demeanor fractured by a deep, visible pain. He placed a gentle hand on Sophia's arm, his touch a silent promise of support. "You should have called us sooner," he said, his voice quiet but heavy with sorrow and regret. Lucas was the last to enter, and his composure broke completely. His eyes, usually so full of life and fire, were brimming with a mixture of tears and raw fury. He dropped to his knees beside her bed, pressing his forehead against her hand, as if trying to absorb her pain into himself. "Sophie, my God," he choked out, his voice breaking. "What did he do to you?" Overwhelmed by their presence, by their love, Sophia's own tears began to fall freely as she tried to force a weak smile. "I didn't want to bother you," she whispered. "You all have your own lives." Ethan cut her off immediately, his tone sharp and absolute. "You are our life." They formed a protective circle around her bed, a human shield against the world. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a flicker of safety ignited within Sophia's terrified heart, and it all began with a single, jarring sound, a phone ringing in a quiet office thousands of miles away. It was a simple moment that acted as the first tremor before a devastating earthquake. Lucas, the youngest of the brothers, the one whose heart was always closest to his sleeve, was the first to get the call. As he listened to the details of Sophia's condition, his face contorted with a rage so potent it seemed to vibrate through the room. A strangled sound of disbelief and fury escaped his lips. The expensive mahogany of his desk nearly splintered under the force of his fist. "He hurt her?" Lucas roared into the phone, his voice shaking with an intensity that terrified his assistant outside the door. "He dared to touch her?" There was no hesitation, no need for discussion. In the next breath, he was on another line, his fingers jabbing at the keypad as he booked the first available flight. "Tell Ethan I'll meet him in Los Angeles," he commanded, his words clipped and final. A promise was being made, a reckoning was being set in motion. So that's how it was. That was the spark that ignited the inferno. "Do we make him pay this instant?" Ethan's piercing glare swept across the tense room, because that is precisely what he's hoping for. He wants a messy, public showdown, a scandal that spins out of our control and makes us look just as bad. No, we will handle this intelligently. We will dismantle his entire life, taking everything he values, piece by painful piece, until he is on his knees, begging for a mercy he will not receive. Lucas's powerful chest heaved with ragged breaths, but he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right, but I give you my word, the very next time he gets anywhere near her, I'm done holding back." Matthew, his mind already mapping out the strategy, added, "I'm bringing in a team of private investigators tonight. We are going to meticulously trace every single dollar Ryan has ever spent, every outstanding bill he has, and every shady business dealing Vanessa is connected to. People like them, they always leave a trail of corruption. All we need to do is follow the smoke, and it will lead us straight to the inferno." Ethan's eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. "And as soon as we possess irrefutable proof, we make it all public." Ryan's entire world is built on perception. His pride, his business, his social standing, it all hinges on him being viewed as the strong, devoted husband and a pillar of the community. The moment we expose the ugly truth that he is a violent abuser and a cheater, completely manipulated by his scheming mistress, his carefully constructed reputation will shatter into a million pieces. And when that happens, so will any leverage he thinks he has in court. The three brothers shared a look of grim understanding, their individual anger now forged into a single, unbreakable purpose. This was no longer just about protecting Sophia. This was about ensuring that Ryan and Vanessa would never have the power to harm her or any other person ever again. Lucas let out a long, slow breath, his voice a low and steady rumble. We're going to end this nightmare for her and for the baby. Ethan placed a solid, reassuring hand on the shoulder of his youngest brother. And with that, the decision was made. A new day was on the horizon. The plan was officially in motion. The meticulously crafted trap was now set. But even as the Bennett brothers prepared to wage their silent, calculated war, Vanessa was already orchestrating a vicious counteroffensive of her own, one designed to strike Sophia in the one place she remained completely vulnerable. For several long days, Sophia was confined to the sterile white walls of the hospital. While her body began the slow process of mending, her spirit remained dangerously fragile. Her brothers maintained a constant protective vigil, forming an impenetrable barrier to ensure that both Ryan and Vanessa were kept at a significant distance. Ethan expertly handled the endless stream of calls from their legal team. Matthew relentlessly pursued financial breadcrumbs, and Lucas simply refused to leave her side for even a moment. The Bennetts were assembling their arsenal of evidence with quiet, deadly precision. However, Ryan Miller was not the kind of man who would wait patiently for his fate, and Vanessa, perpetually one step ahead, murmured into his ear during the dark stillness of the night, "If you continue this overt fight against her, you are going to lose absolutely everything. Her brothers are far too powerful to take on directly. But if you play the part of the victim, if you can convince her you've had a change of heart, she might just lower her defenses, and that is the exact moment we will strike." Ryan bristled at the very thought of humbling himself, but he couldn't deny the cold, calculating logic in Vanessa's plan. Sophia's greatest vulnerability had always been her compassionate heart. She was inherently kind, quick to forgive, and held a desperate, almost childlike belief in the power of love. If he could just artfully maneuver his way back into her trust, even for a fleeting second, he could deceive her into signing away all of her rights. And so, Ryan Miller transformed, becoming an actor dedicated to his most important role yet. He arrived at the hospital on a quiet afternoon, presenting himself in a crisp, clean shirt, with his hair perfectly combed, clutching a large bouquet of white lilies. He looked, in every conceivable way, like the perfectly repentant husband. The nurse stationed at the front desk eyed him with a deep frown. "You really shouldn't be here, sir. I only want to offer my apology," Ryan murmured, his voice soft and his gaze directed at the floor. "Please, I just need to see her for a minute." Inside Sophia's room, Lucas was on his feet. In an instant, the moment Ryan appeared, but Sophia, her heart pounding erratically, lifted a trembling hand to stop him. Just wait. She had not seen Ryan appear so defeated or humble in years. The flowers in his hand quivered as he cautiously approached her bedside. "Sophie," he whispered, using the tender nickname he had abandoned months ago. "I am so sorry for all of it. I was completely lost. Vanessa, she twisted my mind. I don't even know what I was thinking anymore. I'm begging you, please forgive me. Let me please come back home." Tears began to cloud Sophia's vision as a war raged between her heart and her head. She vividly recalled the sharp sting of his hand, the cutting insults, the soul-crushing betrayal. But beneath all that pain, she also remembered the charming man she had once loved with all her heart, the man she had built her dreams upon. Was it possible he was truly changing? Could her baby still have a chance at a real father? Lucas let out a low snarl. "Do you actually think for a second we'll fall for this pathetic act?" Get out of here right now before I physically throw you out. But Ryan's gaze remained locked on Sophia, his voice cracking with feigned emotion. I'll start going to counseling. I will stop drinking. I will do anything and everything it takes. I just want my family back. Please, Sophie. Sophia's lips quivered, unable to form words, as the room seemed to spin with crushing doubt. The stark warnings from her brothers screamed in her mind, a frantic chorus of caution, and yet a desperate, foolish part of her heart pleaded for a sliver of hope. She finally managed to whisper, Ryan, I just don't know if I can ever trust you again. In a move of pure theater, Ryan dropped to his knees right beside her hospital bed, tears, each one carefully rehearsed, glistening in his eyes. He gently pressed the bouquet of lilies into her hands. Then please, just let me prove it to you. One single chance. That's everything I am asking for. Across the room, Matthew and Ethan exchanged pointed glances. They saw the performance for exactly what it was, a calculated, cruel manipulation. But Sophia's fingers tightened around the stems of the flowers, her chest aching with the weight of her internal conflict. And as Sophia began to consider his desperate plea, she was completely unaware that hidden deep within the beautiful bouquet was the first, insidious step in Ryan's cruel new scheme. The lilies that Ryan had presented to Sophia now sat in a simple glass vase on her bedside table. Their pristine white petals seemed to glow in the soft, ambient light of the hospital room, appearing entirely innocent to any casual observer, but they were tainted by the malicious intent of the man who had delivered them. For Sophia, they represented a fragile, uncertain peace offering, a symbol of a future she was no longer sure she could believe in or trust. But for Ryan, they were a critical component of Vanessa's intricate plan, a plan meticulously designed to strip Sophia of every last thing she had left in the world. Later that night, back in the sleek, modern confines of Vanessa's apartment, the two conspirators meticulously reviewed their devious scheme. Ryan paced the length of the living room, his movements jerky with nervous energy, while Vanessa reclined languidly on the sofa, sipping a glass of expensive red wine. She is definitely starting to soften up, Ryan reported, a hint of excitement in his voice. I saw it clearly in her eyes today. She desperately wants to believe me. Vanessa offered a smug smirk, elegantly swirling the wine in her glass. Of course she does, darling. That has always been her fatal flaw. She is far too forgiving for her own good. Now, all we truly need is her signature on the dotted line. The second she signs those documents, she will be left with absolutely nothing. Ryan paused his pacing, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. But her brothers, they are watching her like a pack of wolves. If they get even a hint of what we're doing, Vanessa cut him off, her tone suddenly sharp and impatient. Then, we will simply have to outsmart them. We will frame this so it appears she is willingly agreeing to a formal reconciliation, but the fine print will tell a different story. In reality, she will be signing over every one of her rights, her entire share of the marital assets, and even full custody of the child. I've already contacted a lawyer who specializes in making these kinds of documents completely ironclad. Ryan's brow furrowed, the doubt still lingering. And what if she refuses to sign? Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes glinting with a cold, predatory malice. Then you will have to gently remind her exactly who holds all the power in this situation. You will tell her that forgiveness, like everything else, comes with certain conditions. You will weaponize her love for that unborn baby. You will make her believe that signing these papers is the only possible path to securing a peaceful future. Ryan let out a shaky breath. The idea of wielding such absolute power over Sophia filling him with a dark, twisted sense of satisfaction. So the plan is to trick her into signing away her entire life, and she won't have a clue what she's done until it's far too late. Precisely. Vanessa purred, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. She set her wine glass down and ran a hand along his arm. And as soon as she is completely out of the picture, you and I will finally have it all. Her brothers might be wealthy, but there is nothing they can do if she willingly signs it all away. The very next day, Ryan returned to the hospital, once again impeccably dressed, but this time he carried no flowers. Instead, a large manila envelope was tucked securely under his arm. He wore the very same mask of deep remorse, his voice practically dripping with practiced sincerity as he approached her bed. "Sophia," he began softly, "I had a long talk with a lawyer this morning. He believes we have a real chance to reconcile, but he suggested we draw up some paperwork, just to demonstrate that we are both serious about moving forward together." Sophia blinked slowly, a seed of suspicion finally beginning to sprout in her exhausted mind. Paperwork? What kind of paperwork? Ryan pulled up a chair and offered her a gentle, disarming smile. "Oh, it's nothing complicated at all. Just a simple agreement between the two of us. A chance for a truly fresh start. No more fighting, no more secrets, no more lies." He carefully placed the thick envelope on the table next to her bed. "Just take a look at it whenever you feel ready. If you sign it, it will be a promise from both of us that we are fully committed to making our marriage work again." As fate would have it, her brothers were not present in the room at that precise moment. They had just stepped out for a brief consultation with her doctors down the hall. Sophia found herself staring at the innocuous-looking envelope, her heart feeling as though it were being torn in two by hope and by fear. Could this truly be a genuine step toward healing their broken family? Or was this just another, more sophisticated trap? Ryan leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to a low, persuasive coax. "Do this for our little family, Sophie. Please, do it for our baby." And as Sophia's trembling hand reached out for the envelope, she was completely unaware that the ink on those pages held the devastating power to completely erase her entire future. The plain manila envelope rested on Sophia's bedside table, feeling as ominous and heavy as a ticking bomb. Each time her gaze drifted towards it, a knot of anxiety tightened in her chest. Ryan's words had been so soft, so utterly convincing, that they continued to echo relentlessly inside her head, a haunting refrain. "Do this for the baby. It's just a fresh start." Over and over, her brothers had issued stark warnings, telling her that Ryan was a master manipulator. Ethan had stated it bluntly, without any sugarcoating. "He will absolutely try to trick you, Sophie. You cannot fall for his act." Lucas had growled with raw fury. "I swear I will break his neck with my own 2 hands if he even thinks about coming near you again." Even Matthew, who was always the calm and calculating one, had looked her straight in the eye and said, "You must never sign anything that he gives you. Not a single word on a single page." And yet, in the profound loneliness of the quiet hospital room, Sophia felt her resolve begin to waver. A part of her desperately wanted to believe him. She yearned with every fiber of her being to give her unborn child a whole family, a father who loved them, anything better than a life defined by brokenness. Her heart began to whisper the dangerous thoughts that her logical mind knew were a terrible risk. What if Ryan really means it this time? What if people truly can change? That night, sleep was an impossible luxury. The steady low hum of the hospital's machinery felt deafening in the silence. She turned the thick envelope over and over again in her hands, the paper cool against her skin. What if Ryan was telling the truth? And what if her refusal to trust him only made everything 10 times worse? She pictured a future of raising her baby all alone, enduring the endless gossip, the hushed whispers, and the looks of pity from strangers. She imagined Ryan dragging her through a vicious custody battle, painting her as an unstable and unfit mother in court. Could she possibly survive a war like that? Her tears silently soaked her pillow as a tidal wave of doubt threatened to drown her. She whispered into the stillness, speaking to her unborn child, her voice cracking with despair. "I just don't know what to do. Mommy is so scared. If I sign these papers, maybe he'll finally leave us in peace. Maybe he'll remember how to love us again. But if I don't sign, what if he finds a way to take you away from me?" That single, terrifying thought shattered what little strength she had left. The idea of losing her baby felt more brutal, more agonizing than any physical bruise he had ever left on her body. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt herself start to crumble, feeling ready to surrender everything just to find some semblance of peace. The first pale rays of morning light were filtering through the window blinds when she finally, with a shaking hand, tore the envelope open. Inside, she found a thick stack of papers, dense with impenetrable legal jargon that she could barely begin to comprehend. She flipped through the pages quickly, her hands trembling so badly she could hardly hold them steady. A few frightening words jumped out at her: custody, assets, transfer of rights. But her exhausted, hopeful mind desperately twisted them into something softer, something that almost felt like a promise of a new beginning. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the silent courtroom, a sound that sliced through months of tension and fear, finally bringing peace. Sophia drew a deep, steadying breath, her hand resting on the small bundle nestled against her chest. Her newborn daughter, sleeping soundly, oblivious to the monumental victory her mother had just secured. The judge's voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt. Full custody is awarded to Ms. Bennett. All marital assets, including those fraudulently transferred, are to be returned. Furthermore, this court finds Mr. Ryan and Miss Vanessa complicit in a scheme of coercion and fraud. Across the room, Ryan's face was a mask of disbelief crumbling into despair, while Vanessa stared ahead, her cruel smile finally wiped away, replaced by the stark, cold reality of ruin. It was over. The storm had passed, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Sophia could see the clear sky. But this quiet, triumphant moment was not won easily. It was the culmination of a war declared in the sterile silence of a hospital room. A battle fueled by a love that refused to be broken and a truth that refused to be silenced. That overwhelming victory in court was only possible because Ryan and Vanessa had been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion weeks earlier, a verdict delivered with breathtaking speed. Ethan's plan had worked flawlessly. The interview aired, and the story didn't just spread, it detonated. Across California, screens lit up with Sophia's quiet, courageous face. The hashtag Justice for Sophia didn't just trend, it dominated every social platform, a digital roar of support from thousands of strangers who saw her not as a victim, but as a survivor. The consequences for Ryan and Vanessa were swift and brutal. But the cold, hard facts the documents revealed were far more damning than any rumor. Ethan's hands had trembled with a tightly controlled rage as he first examined the thick sheaf of papers. His sharp eyes flew across the page, his expression growing darker with every treacherous line he read. Matthew, ever the analyst, had moved in closer, his mind already deconstructing the elaborate deception. And Lucas had stayed by Sophia's side, his hand a warm, grounding presence on her arm, his face ashen as he realized how narrowly she had avoided utter ruin. "This isn't a fresh start," Ethan had snarled, his voice a low tremor of fury. "Sophia, this is a declaration of war." Matthew took the papers from his brother, his movements precise, His expertise in finance and law allowed him to see the poison hidden within the dense legal language. The deceit was glaring, a stain of malice on the pristine white pages. He jabbed a finger at a particular paragraph, his voice sharp and clear. "Look here. This clause gives Ryan sole and uncontested custody of your child if you two ever separate for any reason." He flipped a page. "In this one, it legally transfers all your premarital assets directly to him, leaving you with absolutely nothing." Sophia's world tilted, the air leaving her lungs in a painful gasp. "No, that can't be right. He promised me it was just to show we were committed, that we were starting over." Matthew's expression was grim, his gaze softening with pity, but his words remaining brutally honest. "He lied, Sophia. If your signature had touched this paper, you wouldn't have just lost your money or your home. You would have given away your child." The full weight of his words crashed down on her. He would have stolen her baby. A guttural sob escaped her lips as she covered her mouth, her entire body shaking with a violent tremor. The pen, the instrument of her near-total destruction, rolled off the bedside tray and clattered onto the linoleum floor with a final, mocking sound. Tears of terror and relief streamed down her face. "I was so close," she whispered in horror. "I almost handed him my baby." Lucas's grief turned to pure rage in an instant. He spun and slammed his fist into the wall with such force that a picture frame fell and shattered, making the nurses in the hallway jump. "I'm going to kill him. I swear I'll find him and make him eat every single one of these pages." Ethan moved quickly, catching his younger brother's arm in an iron grip. "Not like this, Luke. We won't use our hands. We'll use the truth to bury him." His eyes, burning with cold fury, shifted to Matthew. "Tell me this is enough. Tell me we can burn their world down with this." Matthew gave a slow, dangerous nod. A chilling glint appeared behind his glasses. "Oh, more than enough. This goes far beyond a simple trick. It's calculated, premeditated fraud. There isn't a judge in the state who wouldn't see this for the trap it is. And if we can find Vanessa's fingerprints on these documents, we can prove conspiracy and ruin her too." Sophia's sobs softened into a broken whimper as she clutched her pregnant belly protectively. "But why? How could the man I built a life with, the man I loved, do something so monstrous?" Ethan knelt beside her bed, his voice dropping from a roar to a gentle murmur as his hand came to rest on her shoulder. "Because he's not that man anymore, Sophie. The man you loved is gone, replaced by a weak, greedy coward who let Vanessa poison his heart. But you listen to me," he said, his voice firming with an unbreakable promise. "He will never, ever get your baby. Not as long as the three of us are breathing." For the first time since the nightmare began, a flicker of hope pierced through Sophia's despair. As she looked at her brothers, Ethan the protector, Matthew the strategist, and Lucas the heart, she started to believe she could be saved. Yet, even as this powerful alliance was forged in a stark hospital room, Ryan and Vanessa were celebrating their supposed victory. They sat in a swanky, low-lit bar across town, their glasses clinking together in a toast to their own cleverness, utterly convinced of their success. Vanessa lounged in her seat, a smug, predatory smile on her face. "She'll sign. She's too broken and emotional to even read it." Ryan let out a self-satisfied laugh, taking a long drink, and when she does, everything she has becomes ours. They were blind to the reality that the very documents they had crafted with such malice were about to become the evidence that would systematically dismantle their lives. That stack of forged papers was the spark that would ignite the inferno. Before that moment, for weeks on end, Sophia had been drowning. She was terrified of Ryan's explosive temper, humiliated by his public affair, and suffocating under the shame that he had made her feel. Her tears had been silent, her suffering private, as she convinced herself she was powerless to escape. But hearing Matthew methodically dissect the plot, detailing how Ryan had planned to strip her of her child and her future with a simple stroke of a pen, changed everything. Something deep inside her, a core of strength she thought had been extinguished, began to smolder. Later that night, lying in the quiet of her hospital room, Sophia stared at her own face in the small, wall-mounted mirror. She saw the dark bruises painting her skin, but for the first time, she didn't see weakness. She saw a warrior who had endured a terrible battle and was still standing. Gently, she laid a hand over her womb and made a silent vow. I will never let anyone hurt you. I will never let him take you from me. Not Ryan, not Vanessa, not anymore. The shift in her demeanor was immediate and profound, and her brothers saw it right away. Ethan was the first to acknowledge it, his voice a low rumble of pride. There you are. Your fight is coming back. We're going to need it for what's coming. Sophia met his gaze, her own eyes no longer filled with tears, but with a newfound, hardened resolve. She lifted her chin. I want to help. I'm done hiding from him. A fierce, relieved grin spread across Lucas's face. That's the sister I know. Seizing the moment, Matthew placed a thin file on her lap. It was meticulously organized, containing a foundation of their case. Clinical medical reports detailing her injuries, stark photographs of the bruises, and a carefully constructed timeline of Ryan's escalating aggression. This is our starting point, he explained calmly. Your testimony will be the weapon that brings it all to life. But you have to be ready. It's going to get ugly in public. They will call you a liar, Matthew continued, his tone serious. They'll twist your story and try to paint you as unstable. They'll use your pain against you. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder and looked at the cold, hard proof of her suffering, but she didn't flinch. Instead, a quiet strength settled over her. Let them, she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. My truth is the one thing they can't have. Her brother shared a look of pure admiration. The fragile, broken woman who had been admitted just days ago was gone. In her place was a survivor, reforging herself, piece by piece, into the fighter they always knew she could be. The very next morning, she refused the flimsy hospital gown. With Lucas's gentle assistance, she dressed herself in a pair of soft pants and a simple, clean blouse. The deep purple and blue bruises on her arms and neck were still starkly visible against her skin, but she made no move to conceal them. When Ethan quietly offered her a silk scarf to cover them, she shook her head firmly. No, these aren't marks of shame, she declared, her voice ringing with newfound conviction. They are the evidence of what he did to me. Let the world see it. Her brother stood by, their hearts swelling with a mixture of pride and fierce protectiveness. Witnessing her reclaim her narrative and her dignity so powerfully solidified their resolve tenfold. That afternoon, the four of them gathered in a small, private conference room at the hospital, transforming it into a war room. Ethan was on the phone, leveraging his network to consult with the city's best lawyers. Matthew, meanwhile, was already hiring private investigators, instructing them to tear apart every aspect of Ryan and Vanessa's financial lives. Lucas took on the task of building a wall of witnesses, coordinating with Sophia's colleagues and friends who had long suspected the awful truth. The most crucial move, however, came directly from Sophia. She sat with a pen and a legal pad, and with painstaking clarity, she wrote her official statement. She poured out every painful detail, every secret she had been forced to keep, every threat she had endured. Her hand was unsteady, but the words that flowed onto the page were powerful and resolute. When she finally set the pen down, she looked up at her three brothers, her protectors. "This isn't just about me anymore, is it?" she said. "This is for every person who was ever made to feel that they had to suffer in silence." As she signed her name at the bottom of the last page, the ink drying into a symbol of her defiance, Sophia had no idea she was lighting the fuse. She had just ignited a firestorm that would soon engulf Ryan and Vanessa, bringing them down to face the justice they so richly deserved. That signature transformed everything, marking the moment the Bennetts shifted their strategy from defense to an all-out assault. For what felt like an eternity, Ryan and Vanessa had operated from the shadows, confident in their manipulative games, believing they had backed Sophia into a corner from which she could never escape. Their fatal miscalculation was underestimating the fury of three devoted brothers armed with immense resources, unwavering influence, and a loyalty so fierce it could move mountains. They had simply pushed too far. Ethan, a master of public relations, took charge of the media offensive. He made calls to seasoned, respected journalists he had known for years. "I want the unvarnished truth published," he instructed, his voice radiating authority. "No tabloid gossip, no anonymous sources, just the cold, hard facts: domestic violence, financial coercion, and blatant fraud. We are going to bury them in a mountain of their own lies until they can't breathe." While Ethan managed the public narrative, Matthew waged a silent war in the world of numbers and spreadsheets, dispatching his best investigators to excavate Ryan's entire financial history. It didn't take long. Within a matter of days, a mountain of incriminating evidence began to form. There were mountains of unpaid debts, fraudulently filed tax returns, and a clear, undeniable trail of transactions connecting Ryan's struggling auto shop directly to Vanessa's cash-heavy bar. "They've been laundering money together," Matthew announced, during a late-night meeting in Sophia's hospital room, tapping a thick binder of documents. "It's amateurish, honestly, but it's more than enough to establish a criminal conspiracy. The moment this information goes public, any credibility they have left will evaporate instantly." Lucas, meanwhile, focused on the human element of their case. He patiently and compassionately met with Sophia's coworkers from the hospital, with neighbors who had heard the shouting matches through the walls, and even with the emergency medical technicians who had transported her to the hospital that terrible night. Slowly but surely, he collected a chorus of sworn statements, each one a testament to what they had witnessed. The bruises she tried to hide with makeup, the muffled screams, and the night she was carried from her home on a stretcher. Lucas's intense, fiery demeanor would always soften whenever he turned to Sophia. He gently took her hand, his expression full of love. "Every person who agrees to speak out makes your voice stronger, Sophie," he told her. "You don't have to carry this burden by yourself ever again." At the center of this powerful counteroffensive was Sophia herself. Initially, the thought of sharing her story with the world filled her with a familiar, paralyzing fear. She had spent so much of her energy trying to conceal her pain from everyone. But when Ethan secured a private, televised interview with a highly respected journalist known for her integrity, Sophia found the courage to agree. As she sat down in front of the cameras, her hands trembled in her lap, but her voice, when she began to speak, was surprisingly steady. She told the story of the love she had once shared with Ryan, the countless sacrifices she had made for their future, and the devastating night he shattered her trust with his fists. "He did everything he could to take my entire world away from me," she stated, her hand instinctively coming to rest on her pregnant belly, a gesture of both protection and defiance. "But he forgot something very important." Her gaze was direct, her voice clear and strong. "He couldn't take my truth. and I refused to be silent 1 second longer. It all sounded, to her shattered heart, like a chance for reconciliation. The pin lay on the tray next to her hospital bed, a sleek, simple tool that held the power to either rebuild her life or sign it away forever. She reached for it, her fingers trembling so uncontrollably that the smooth plastic almost slipped from her grasp. With a deep, shuddering breath, she brought the fine tip toward the first signature line, the frantic pounding of her heart echoing in her ears. And just as the dark ink was a millimeter from making contact with the crisp white paper, the door to her room crashed open with a violent bang. Ethan stormed in first, his face a thundercloud, with Matthew and Lucas right behind him. Ethan's piercing eyes immediately locked onto the papers in her lap. He froze for a fraction of a second, his entire body going rigid. Then his voice boomed through the quiet room, a command that was not to be defied. "Sophia, put the pen down. Now." She jumped, a startled cry escaping her lips. Tears immediately welled in her eyes and began to stream down her bruised cheeks. As she looked up at him, her voice a broken whisper. "But Ethan, what if signing this is the only chance I have left?" Ignoring her plea, her brother surged forward, snatching the treacherous documents from her hands. The last of the reporters' camera flashes faded from the grand ballroom. But the image of Vanessa Lopez's crumbling facade and Ryan Miller's stark terror was permanently etched in the public's mind. Justice, it turned out, wasn't a silent verdict in a sterile courtroom. It was a thunderous applause from a room full of strangers who had finally seen the truth. In the quiet aftermath, Sophia sat wrapped in a warm blanket, a cup of tea cradled in her hands, watching the city lights twinkle from her brother's penthouse. The news cycle was a maelstrom, replaying the gala's shocking events on a loop. Ryan's pathetic denials, lying, "She's trying to ruin me," were now a national joke, his words utterly powerless against the mountain of irrefutable proof and Marisol's brave testimony. Vanessa's desperate attempts to control the narrative, her tear-filled interviews in designer dresses, now looked like the pathetic theatrics they were. The public wasn't just unconvinced, they were disgusted. Each performance only dug the grave of her reputation deeper. Looking at her brothers, Ethan stoic and watchful, Lucas buzzing with triumphant energy, Sophia felt a profound calm settle over her. The tide had not just turned, it had become a tidal wave, washing away the filth and leaving her standing on solid ground. Her voice had mattered. Her pain had been validated. Yet she remembered Ethan's warning from weeks ago, a shadow of a memory in this bright moment. "Don't celebrate yet," he had said, his voice a low growl. "Cornered animals are the most dangerous." He had been right. Their final, desperate move had been terrifying. That desperate move was born from utter humiliation. Before their downfall was cemented at the gala, Ryan Miller and Vanessa Lopez had been drowning in the consequences of Sophia's initial televised interview. The backlash was swift and merciless. Tabloid headlines screamed their names across every newsstand. Local mechanic accused of brutalizing pregnant wife. Cable news channels ran Sophia's testimony on a constant loop, her voice trembling but unbroken, the faint bruises on her skin, a testament to her words that cut through every viewer's heart. Public sympathy, once a fickle thing, had solidified entirely behind her. It translated into real-world consequences almost immediately. Customers canceled appointments at Ryan's auto shop, leaving the bays eerily silent. Vanessa's trendy bar, once a bustling hotspot, became a ghost town overnight. Even their oldest acquaintances, suddenly stopped taking their calls, their social circle evaporating as if it had never existed. But for people like Ryan and Vanessa, shame was not a catalyst for remorse. It was fuel for their fury. They were not prepared to accept defeat. They refused to surrender to the consequences of their own actions, choosing instead to double down on their cruelty. The plan for their ultimate destruction of Sophia was hatched in the dim, stale-smelling back room of Vanessa's deserted bar. The flickering neon sign outside cast erratic, sickly green light on their faces as they huddled together, their whispers venomous. "They're destroying me," Ryan snarled, his voice thick with rage as he slammed a clenched fist on the worn wooden table, making the empty glasses jump. "My business, my reputation, it's all gone. It's all because of her and those damn brothers of hers who think they run the world." Vanessa's eyes, usually sparkling with practiced charm, were narrowed into cold, hard slits. Her voice was a blade, sharp and deliberate. "Then we destroy her first before she can do any more damage," she hissed. "She's feeling too powerful right now, too bold with everyone on her side. If we can shatter her credibility in public, if we can break her completely, no one will ever believe a word she says again. We have to humiliate her so profoundly that she looks exactly like the hysterical liar we've been saying she is." Ryan's frustration gave way to a flicker of cruel interest. He leaned in closer, the scent of cheap whiskey on his breath. "How?" he asked. With a predatory slowness, Vanessa slid a manila folder across the sticky surface of the table. Inside that folder was a meticulously crafted fiction of betrayal. There were photographs, cleverly doctored to place Sophia in compromising situations with a stranger. There were forged receipts from luxury hotels implying secret getaways, and there were pages of fabricated text messages, a cruel narrative of infidelity and deceit. "We plant these," Vanessa explained, her voice devoid of any emotion. "We make it look like Sophia was the one living a double life, cheating on her loving husband. Once this poison gets out there, all that public sympathy she has will vanish in an instant. She'll be the one they shame, the one they call a tramp." A slow, bitter smile twisted Ryan's lips as the insidious genius of the plan settled in. "And her brothers," he added, a spark of vengeful glee in his eyes, "they won't be able to protect her from that kind of public shaming." The very next morning, their vile strategy was unleashed. A coordinated storm of rumors erupted across the internet. Fake screenshots, looking disturbingly authentic, circulated on social media, claiming Sophia was exchanging illicit messages. The forged receipts were leaked to gossip blogs, and anonymous, well-funded accounts amplified the lies, turning whispers into a roar of condemnation. Sophia first learned of the character assassination when a young nurse approached her cautiously, her face a mixture of pity and hesitation as she held out her phone. The headline read, "Was the abused wife a liar all along?" The words hit her with the force of a physical blow, and her heart plummeted into a cold, dark abyss. "No, no, this can't be true," she sobbed, her hands trembling as she grabbed the phone. I would never." Ethan snatched the device from her, his expression turning thunderous as he scanned the article. "Don't you dare look at this trash," he commanded, his voice shaking with protective fury. "It's all fabricated. It's poison, and we're going to expose it for what it is." But the poison was already seeping into the public consciousness. Whispers followed Sophia down the hospital corridors. Strangers online, emboldened by anonymity, flooded the comment section of her interview video with vile accusations. "Maybe she deserved what she got." One comment read, "Maybe she lied about everything to get attention." Each cruel word was another twist of the knife in a wound that had just begun to heal. Lucas, unable to stand still, paced the room like a caged tiger, his rage a palpable force. "They're trying to destroy her all over again," Lucas seethed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I swear I will personally track down every single person spreading this filth, and I will make them shut it down." Matthew, ever the strategist, remained outwardly calmer, but his eyes held an equally fierce fire. "They've made their move," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Good. Now we know exactly how low they're willing to go, but raw anger won't be enough to fight this. We're going to need irrefutable proof that every single one of these lies originated directly from Ryan and Vanessa." Amid her brother's vows of retribution, Sophia sat silently on the edge of her bed, her hands protectively wrapped around her belly as hot tears streamed down her face. She had fought so incredibly hard just to reclaim her own voice, and now they were using lies to try and steal it from her all over again. But as she sat there, something shifted deep inside her. The fragile victim was gone. This time, she refused to break. Wiping her tears with the back of her hand, she looked up, meeting the furious eyes of her brothers. Her own voice was shaky, but it was laced with steel. "Then let's fight harder," she declared. "I won't let them win," Sophia repeated, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Not now, not ever." Just as the Bennett family resolved to launch their counterattack, a development they could never have predicted was about to unfold. A mysterious witness, someone who had been lurking in the shadows, was preparing to step into the light. A person whose testimony held the power to obliterate Ryan and Vanessa's web of deceit once and for all. The vicious smear campaign had cut her deeply, but Sophia's newfound resolve, bolstered by her brother's unwavering support, held firm. Yet, as they began to strategize how to disprove the doctored evidence, a chilling fear settled in. The tide of public opinion, once so strongly in her favor, was beginning to waver, poisoned by the convincing nature of the online lies. For the first time since she had spoken out, a terrifying thought crept into Sophia's mind. What if the truth wasn't enough to win? Then, one evening, as the three brothers and their sister were gathered in the hospital's private family lounge, poring over legal options, a soft but firm knock sounded at the door. Ethan was on his feet in an instant, his body instinctively shifting into a protective stance between the door and his sister, fully prepared for a confrontation. He expected to see Ryan's arrogant sneer or Vanessa's smug face. But when he pulled the door open, the person standing in the hallway was a complete stranger. She was a middle-aged woman, plainly dressed, with weary lines etched around her eyes that spoke of a difficult life. Yet there was a resolute set to her jaw that defied her tired appearance. She clutched a worn leather purse to her chest, as if it contained all her courage. "Are you Sophia Bennett?" she asked, her voice soft and hesitant. Sophia, taken aback, exchanged a quick, uncertain glance with her brothers before nodding slowly. "Yes," she answered. "Who are you?" The woman took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold, quietly closing the door behind her, sealing them all in the room together. "My name is Marisol Vega," she said, her voice shaking slightly but her gaze holding steady. "I used to work for Vanessa Lopez. I was her bar manager and personal assistant for 3 years. And I can prove everything she's done." A stunned silence descended upon the room, so thick it was almost suffocating. Ethan was the first to move, stepping closer, his protective suspicion warring with a surge of hope. His tone was sharp, demanding. "What exactly can you prove?" Marisol's hands trembled visibly as she fumbled with the clasp of her purse, finally pulling out a thick folder. With unsteady fingers, She laid it on the small table. Inside was a collection of damning evidence: photographs of Vanessa meeting with a shady graphic designer, copies of the original, undoctored images, and handwritten notes detailing the entire smear campaign. Vanessa had me help her, Marisol confessed, her voice cracking. She asked me to forge those documents, the fake text messages, the hotel receipts. She made me sit with her and help create them. I finally quit the day she showed me the final product. I just couldn't be a part of destroying an innocent woman's life. Sophia's breath hitched in her throat, her eyes wide with disbelief. You saw her do all of it? Marisol met her gaze and nodded, a look of deep shame and regret on her face. I saw everything. She laughed about it while she was doing it. I heard her say, "Once people think Sophia is a cheater, Ryan can take the baby, and her high and mighty brothers won't be able to save her." Her eyes began to glisten with unshed tears. I kept my mouth shut because I was terrified, Marisol continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. Vanessa knows some very dangerous people. She threatened me. But after I saw your interview on the news, Miss Bennet, after I saw how brave you were, I knew I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent anymore. You don't deserve any of this. Lucas shot to his feet, unable to contain the explosive energy surging through him. He began pacing the small room, his mind racing. We've got them. With her testimony, we've finally got them cornered. Matthew, ever the calm analyst, carefully picked up the folder, his sharp eyes scanning each document with intense focus. These materials are absolutely damning, he murmured, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. Combined with Marisol's first-hand statement, they will completely obliterate Vanessa's credibility and expose Ryan as a co-conspirator. He looked up from the papers, his usual calm expression sharpened into something fierce and predatory. This, he declared, his voice ringing with certainty, is the weapon we needed. Ethan moved to stand in front of Marisol, his gaze serious and intense. He needed her to understand the full weight of her decision. If you testify, he said, his voice steady, Vanessa will come after you with everything she has. Are you truly prepared for that battle? Marisol visibly straightened her shoulders, a new strength settling over her. She has already ruined too many lives, she said, her voice clear and strong. I refuse to let her ruin another one. I will stand up in court. I'll go on television. I will go anywhere you need me to go. She cannot silence me anymore. Overcome with emotion, Sophia rose from her chair and gently took the other woman's trembling hands into her own. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a long time they were tears of overwhelming gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for giving me a real chance to fight back. For the first time since the nightmare began, a powerful wave of hope surged through the room, bright and undeniable. With Marisol on their side, they could dismantle the lies piece by piece. But their newfound hope was immediately tempered with danger. Just as the Bennets began to plan their next move, incorporating this powerful new weapon into their strategy, Vanessa discovered Marisol's betrayal through a network of informants. Enraged and cornered, she swore to her allies that she would silence her former employee permanently before she ever had a chance to speak a single word in public. The Bennets understood that this battle could no longer be fought in the shadows or online. To truly shatter Ryan and Vanessa's power and expose their corruption, the truth had to be revealed on the grandest, most public stage imaginable. That stage presented itself in the form of the annual Beverly Hills Business Gala, a glittering, high-profile event where the city's most powerful CEOs, investors, and media personalities all gathered under one roof. It was the absolute perfect venue to detonate their bomb of truth ensuring the fallout would be witnessed by the very people whose opinions mattered most. Ethan, drawing on his military background, orchestrated their plan with cold precision. "We don't just walk in there," Ethan instructed his siblings in a hushed meeting the day of the event. "We make an entrance, we make a statement. This is where we show the entire world who Sophia really is and who they really are." On the night of the gala, Sophia arrived flanked by her three brothers, a united and formidable front. She had chosen a simple yet elegant navy dress. Her healing bruises were still faintly visible on her arms, but she made no effort to conceal them. Instead of symbols of shame, she wore them as badges of a survivor. Her hand rested protectively on her stomach, a silent declaration of both her deepest pain and her greatest strength. A wave of gasps and whispers followed them as they entered the opulent ballroom. Every person in that room had seen the scandalous headlines and the vicious online rumors. Now they were seeing the woman at the center of the storm in the flesh. Ryan and Vanessa were already there, preening for the cameras. Ryan, in a crisp, black tuxedo, was trying desperately to project an air of unshakable confidence. Vanessa was a vision in a glittering, diamond-encrusted gown, her arm possessively hooked through his as she smiled for the photographers. The practiced smiles on their faces froze and then faltered the exact moment they saw Sophia and the Bennett brothers striding purposefully toward the center of the room. Lucas leaned close to his sister, his voice a low, encouraging murmur in her ear. Ready to end this nightmare for good? Sophia took a deep, steadying breath and nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her resolve like granite. Ready. When the event hosts opened the floor for special announcements, Ethan moved seamlessly to the stage and took the microphone. The lively chatter in the room died instantly as his commanding voice, honed by years of leadership, echoed through the speakers. "Tonight is not about business," he began, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "Tonight is about the truth." He then turned and gestured to Sophia. She stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, and took the microphone from him. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew stronger with every word. "For months I lived in fear and silence," she said, her eyes meeting those of the glittering, powerful crowd. "I was beaten, betrayed, and systematically humiliated by the man who stood at an altar and vowed to love and protect me," Sophia continued, her voice ringing with conviction. "And when I finally found the courage to speak my truth, he and his mistress conspired to destroy my reputation with a campaign of disgusting lies." A wave of audible gasps and shocked murmurs erupted across the ballroom. The frantic clicking of cameras sounded like a volley of gunfire. Vanessa's polished smile had twisted into a venomous snarl. But Sophia's voice rose above the noise, stronger now than ever before. "But I am not alone anymore. I have my family. I have the proof of their deception. And tonight—" She paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension build. "I have a witness who can confirm every single thing I have said." On that powerful cue, Matthew, standing near the side of the stage, gave a subtle signal toward the back entrance. And through the parted curtains, Marisol Vega walked onto the stage, her steps steady and her gaze unwavering, despite the hundreds of eyes suddenly fixed on her. The crowd murmured in confusion and anticipation as she took the microphone from Sophia's hand. "My name is Marisol Vega, and I worked for Vanessa Lopez," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I was there. I helped her forge the documents." The response was deafening. The applause that erupted shook the very foundations of the ballroom. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a roar of support from strangers, allies, and even stoic business leaders who now stood on their feet, cheering for her breathtaking courage. But this triumphant moment was born from the pure chaos of just minutes earlier. The victory was sealed the instant Marisol, Vanessa's former assistant, stood trembling but resolute on the stage and said the words that shattered the illusion. I have the false evidence used to smear Sophia. Vanessa ordered me to do it. I kept quiet because I was afraid, but I can't anymore. As she spoke, she held up a thumb drive, and documents instantly filled the giant screen behind her. Bank statements, forged medical reports, and emails. Here are the originals, she declared. This is the truth. The ballroom exploded. Reporters surged forward like a tidal wave, shouting questions. The guests, once schmoozing with Ryan and Vanessa, now turned on them with looks of pure disgust. Ryan's face went completely pale, the blood draining from it as if he'd seen a ghost. And Vanessa's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. You traitor, she hissed at Marisol, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. Sophia, standing beside her brothers, met Vanessa's furious gaze. Tears of vindication glistened in her eyes, but her voice was unwavering. You did everything you could to break me, she projected, her words ringing with newfound power. But tonight, I am taking back every single thing you tried to steal from me. As security personnel began moving purposefully toward the disgraced couple, Vanessa's mask of sophistication didn't just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. She lost all control, lunging wildly toward Marisol. You think you can ruin me? You're a nobody, she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. But two large guards intercepted her easily, grabbing her by the arms. She kicked and screamed, a trapped animal, her glittering gown now a mockery of her former status. Ryan, in contrast, was utterly frozen, a statue of disbelief. All his arrogance and bravado had evaporated, leaving him exposed under the harsh glare of hundreds of condemning eyes. He started to stammer, his words weak and unconvincing. It's all fake. A setup. She's lying. Sophia's lying. But his pathetic denials were drowned out by the undeniable proof on the screen. The forged documents, Marisol's brave testimony, and the mountain of evidence her brother Matthew had secretly gathered, it all formed an irrefutable picture of the truth. His desperate lies only made him appear smaller and more pathetic. Ethan stepped to the microphone, his voice booming with righteous anger. This is the man who beat his pregnant wife, he announced to the silent room. A man who tried to steal her child and thought he could silence her with lies and deceit. That ends tonight. It ends forever. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming, a wave of applause for justice mixed with shouts of outrage directed at the cornered couple. Lucas, Sophia's other brother, leaned in, his fists clenched. They're finished, he whispered with grim satisfaction. The police officers, called in advance by the Bennetts, entered the ballroom at that precise moment, their presence signaling the final, inescapable conclusion to the night's drama. That perfectly executed takedown, however, wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was the result of weeks of meticulous, secret planning that began in the sterile quiet of a hospital room. After Sophia had confided everything to her brothers, they had sprung into action. Matthew, with his quiet intensity and legal expertise, had been the mastermind. He spent sleepless nights digging into Ryan and Vanessa's finances, tracing the dirty money and uncovering the shell companies they used to hide their assets. He was the one who found Marisol, not through threats, but by appealing to her conscience. He met her in a small, discreet coffee shop far from her office, showing her evidence that she was being set up to be the scapegoat. He promised her protection, assuring her that the Bennett family would stand by her. It was a gamble, but it paid off when she finally agreed to turn over the original documents that would prove Sophia's innocence and expose the entire conspiracy. All of this, the planning, the gala, the public humiliation, was fueled by the memory of one horrific night. The night the world shattered. It began with the sickening thud of her body hitting the floor. While an ambulance screamed its way toward their home, Ryan didn't follow. He stood there, fists clenched and chest heaving, not with concern, but with cold, calculated anger. As the paramedics loaded Sophia onto a stretcher, a figure emerged from the shadows of the hallway. It was Vanessa Lopez. She glided to his side, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, her voice a venomous, smooth whisper. "You did the right thing, Ryan," she purred, her words weaving a spell of manipulation. "She's been lying to you from the very beginning. That child isn't even yours. Forget her. We can build a much better life together, without her and her lies." Her poisonous words coiled around him like chains, pulling him deeper and deeper into the web of deceit she had so expertly spun. Meanwhile, across town, the emergency ward at Los Angeles General Hospital burst into controlled chaos. Nurses and doctors rushed Sophia through the sliding doors, their voices a blur of medical jargon and urgent commands. The irony was almost unbearable, a cruel twist of fate. This was the very hospital where she worked, the place where she had spent years comforting patients, holding hands, and saving lives. Now, she was the one on the gurney, a fragile, broken patient in her own workplace. The nurses recognized her instantly, their faces paling with shock. "It's Sophia," one of them whispered, her voice laced with horror. "She's one of us." Hours crawled by, under the harsh, unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights as doctors fought to stabilize her, their faces grim as they monitored the fragile heartbeats of both mother and child. The night dragged on, thick with a suffocating uncertainty, as whispers of concern filled the hospital halls. And hundreds of miles away, three powerful men, her brothers, were about to get a phone call that would upend their entire world and set them on a path of righteous vengeance. And so, our journey, which began with triumph, ends here, in a place of profound pain. If you have followed this story backward to its dark beginning, then something in Sophia's ordeal must have resonated deep within you in a way that simple words cannot capture. Her story was never just about a vicious betrayal or a satisfying quest for revenge. It was a testament to survival, a fight for dignity, and a portrait of the incredible courage it takes to rise up when you have been completely broken. Life has a way of unleashing terrible storms upon us, and sometimes those storms are created by the very people we once trusted with our hearts. But this is the fundamental truth. Our pain does not get to define who we are. What defines us is how we choose to get back on our feet after we've been knocked down. As the great Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Sophia found that strength in the harrowing silence of that hospital room, the moment she decided she would not be silenced forever. Her scars became her testimony, and her tears fueled her courage. With the unwavering support of her family, she proved that no lie, no act of cruelty, and no betrayal can ever truly extinguish the truth. That is a lesson we can all carry into the battles of our own lives. Perhaps you too have been deeply hurt or felt utterly abandoned. Please remember this. You are not weak, and you are not alone. Sometimes, speaking your truth is the very first step toward reclaiming your freedom. If Sophia's journey moved you, if it ignited even a small spark of strength within you, please show your support by hitting the like button, sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribing to our channel. Together, we can continue to tell stories that remind us of the immense courage that lies within us all. Because in the end, as Epictetus taught, is it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And like Sophia, may we all learn to react with unshakable courage. If this story touches your heart, please take a moment to hit the like button. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done in Sophia's place. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. And subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story of courage, justice, and the unbreakable power of family. Editorial disclaimer. This content was personally researched, crafted, and edited by our team with care, created to bring meaning, lessons, and inspiration to every viewer who listens until the very end.